Hello and welcome to my all sites tier list. Tarkov is a game of many variables, and when you factor in different variables, you get different tier lists. So for my lists, the main variable I'm focusing on is combat effectiveness. To give you an example of kind of what I mean, it's like you encounter a team of 3 and you have this sight on your weapon, and you're thinking, how effective is this sight going to be in this situation, and how confident am I in this engagement? As far as the structure of this video, we will start with assault scopes, then go to collimators, then compact collimators, and then optics. This is not going to be the most entertaining video, but I do hope it is informative. This is for the patch 12.12. So if any of this stuff has changed in the future, it is because this video is in the past. With that said, Tarkov is just a game, so go out there, good luck, have fun, and let's start the video. Assault scopes. The Hammer and the Bravo are the best in this category, with the Bravo having cleaner 1x, little bit more 4x zoom, and a -2 ergo penalty compared to the Hammer's -3.5. The Prism 2.5x is a really good budget or early wipe option if you can get past the lenses and the reticle. Starting with the Elcan, this is a 1x and 4x scope with backup iron sights. In the past, these iron sights were a bit harder to use, but since the sights rework, they've gotten a bit nicer. That being said, I still think they're an overall negative to the scope because the fact that they're there encourages you to use them over the 1x. And the 1x is better for most players in most situations, even in an emergency or full spray situation, because the 1x is actually more like a 0.8x, making recoil a bit easier to control under full spray or when you're caught off guard. Let's go ahead and compare the Elcan 1x to the Valde 1x. Looking at the van here in the middle, it looks pretty similar on both sides. There's not much going on that is too alarming. However, if you look higher on the screen, you'll notice something truly shocking. Did you see it? Right there! The brick wall of one side of the building does not line up with the brick wall of the other side of the building. Is this just an elaborate hoax, or is there some crazy things going on here? You decide in the comments below. Actually, what's going on is these are both supposed to be 1x's, but the Elcan side is more like a 0.8x, so it's actually more zoomed out. So let's compare that with some other 1x's that you guys are probably more familiar with. So comparing the Elcan to the TAC-30, it's a lot easier to tell that the van on the TAC-30 side is a lot larger than the van on the Elcan side. Again, this is because the Elcan is not a true 1x, it's more like a 0.8x. And having that zoom means that the Elcan is easier to control in a full spray or emergency situation, which is why the 1x is still preferable over the iron sights because it gives you more control in a full spray. Looking here at the Voodoo, you can see the roof of the van is aligned, but the front wheel of the van on the Voodoo side is a lot lower than the rear wheel of the van on the Elcan side. Also with the Elcan, in the modding menu, it shows that you can mount something to the top of it. However, there's nothing in-game that you can mount to the top of it. That being said, this isn't that big of a deal. It's a little weird, but it's not that big of a deal because even if you could mount something on top of the Elcan, it wouldn't change my opinion of the scope. The Elcan FDE. This is exactly the same as the other Elcan, except for the external finish of the scope, so it is also going into D tier. This is what it looks like on your weapon. Backup iron sights. This is your 1x, which is more like a 0.8x, making full auto sprays a little bit easier to control than when compared to the iron sights. And here is the 4x. The Hammer. This is one of the best in the category and easily goes up to A rank. For purpose of demonstration, I added a delta point. This is how most people are going to run this scope in Raid. The delta point, however, is an additional cost to the scope. In general, when speaking of the Hammer versus the Bravo, The hammer is frowned upon for 1x work because you have the housing of the delta point and then the housing of the hammer scope. So the double housing reduces your vision when doing 1x work, and also this little gap here upsets me on a personal level. Like why is there like here it's nice and flush, here there's a big gap. Why you do this to me? In 4x is where the hammer really shines. The housing is thin, the picture is very clean, and the reticle is wonderful. If you're mainly doing 4x work, this is where the hammer is at its best. The Monstrum is a 2.0x scope that I am putting into C tier. In the past, this used to be a reasonable alternative to a 1x Collinator because the 2x would give you better vision of your target, and the fact that it was 2x meant full auto recoil was still pretty reasonable to control. This wipe, they've changed how recoil works, so recoil is a lot more harsh now, making this scope a lot harder to use and a lot less effective. That being said, the Prism 2.5x I think is a better alternative as we are about to explore. So the Prism 2.5x, I am actually quite fond of this scope, so it is going into Bravo tier. This is a great budget or early wipe scope, and there's two main things that players really dislike about it. One is the inclusion of these lens caps, which take up a large portion of real estate on your screen. And two, being this reticle, which is really wild and kind of an eyesore to look at. That being said, the two biggest benefits of this scope is the way it affects your sensitivity of your mouse while you're zoomed in. It feels really good to move around while aiming with this scope, and also this is a good scope for essentially spraying, because the way the scope bounces during recoil, you still have vision of your target. That being said, let's compare the Prism to the Monstrum, which is the more well-known spraying scope in this category. With the Prism, you have more vision, and the way the Prism handles the bounces of the recoil, the Prism is more effective at maintaining sight picture while under the effect of recoil. So while you are shooting at your target, you can still see your target better with the Prism when compared to the Monstrum. This is not in-game, but this is my attempt to show what the Prism could look like if the lens caps are removed. This is also not in-game, but this is my attempt at showing what the reticle could look like with the wild and kind of difficult to look at part of it removed. If the Prism was like this, I think you would see a lot more players using it and a lot more people being happy with the scope overall. The Bravo. This is my favorite in the category and easily goes to A rank. I don't think the Bravo is S rank, but I do think the Bravo is better than the Hammer. So if the Bravo is like A+, I would say the Hammer is like A-. They still both are deserving to be in the A tier, but I do believe that the Bravo is better. So this is what it looks like. It's very sleek and compact. So to mention, this is an additional cost to the Bravo. This is a Burris Fast Tack on the top of here, which is my go-to red dot for 1x work. It has a very clean housing and looks wonderful. That being said, the dot in certain situations can be rather blurry, so that's a negative to the Burris Fast Tack, but we're here to talk about the Bravo. So this is what you get when you get the Bravo. This is the main part of the scope. Compared to the Hammer, you can see that the housing is thicker. However, the reticle in general is just as useful as the Hammer. However, it's not as pleasing to look at, but it's still a very useful 4x. So this is the big thing that people talk about when they talk about the Hammer and the Bravo. The big difference is in terms of 1x work. So here you can see quite dramatically that the housing of the delta point and the housing of the Hammer combine to take a lot of your vision away, while using the Burris Fast Tack on the Bravo, your vision is beautiful. Like, it's great. Doing 1x work with this is very, very pleasing because you don't have these big frames getting in the way. So this is the big selling point for me why the Bravo is better than the Hammer. because I only really use 4x in the situation of like a target has been spotted and I need to either see them to confirm or I need to see them to hit them with the one tap and move on. Most of the time when I'm using the hammer or the Bravo, I'm in the 1x setting, and most of the time I will always pick the Bravo over the hammer just for the clarity of the 1x. In 4x, this is where the hammer is better, and I would say the reticle of the hammer looks nicer. Also, with the Bravo, you see a little bit more, and if you focus on the van, you can notice that the rear wheel of the van on the Bravo side is lower than the front wheel of the van on the hammer side, which is higher. So with the Bravo, you actually get more of a zoom in comparison to the hammer. So another selling point for me on the Bravo is the Bravo has an ergonomics score of -2, and the hammer has an ergonomics score of -3.5. Now, do you see my cursor here in the middle? Follow me for a second. We're going over this way. When you apply it to the modding menu, it will show you -4. However, when you actually put the hammer on top of the weapon, it is -3.5. So it'll show you 4, but it is 3.5, which is kind of weird, but okay. So yeah, it's -2 versus -3.5. Ultimately, not a big deal. Use whichever one you like more. I think the Bravo's better. Some people like the hammer. It's fine. Just use whatever you enjoy, but these are both the best in the category, and these are just the best assault scopes. The ACOG 3.5. This scope is not very good and is going into E tier, which is kind of a bummer. This is a bummer scope because it looks quite nice on the weapon, and it's quite nice to aim with it. The housing isn't too annoying. The picture is really nice and clean. As you can see, there is very minimal gradient around the edges. Like, we saw the gradient in the Bravo and the hammer. There's very minimal gradient here. But the issue with this scope that almost makes it unusable to me is this targeting reticle comes with a level of inconsistency, which basically renders this scope primarily as being a spraying scope as opposed to a tapping scope. And I feel like if you're going for a spraying scope, you should go for the prism. So what do I mean by this reticle comes with a level of inconsistency? Let me open this up in MS Paint and show you what I'm on about. So I've done a number of live and offline raids with this scope in order to develop my opinion about it, and this number might not be entirely accurate. This is more just kind of a general feeling that I get, but I'd say the magic number for targets is 80 meters. So what do I mean by this? If your target is more than 80 meters away, you should use the tip of the triangle for aiming at the target. Whereas if your target is closer than 80 meters, you should be aiming here, more towards the center of the triangle. This level of inconsistency I find quite aggravating because this to me basically renders the scope unusable, because when you go to tap a target with, like, for example, a single shot from a distance, you don't have the confidence that you know where your shot is actually going. So to me, this scope is quite a bummer, because if the scope had a chevron reticle or even a dot reticle, I think the scope would be far more usable and a lot of people would like it a lot more. But this triangle, it gives the scope a level of inconsistency where when you're looking at a target, you don't know if when you tap them if it'll actually connect or not. And for that, this scope to me is basically only used as a spraying scope, not really a tapping scope, and that kind of renders it useless for me with the 3.5 magnification, because I would rather use the 2.5 of the prism if the intention was to spray down a target. Additionally, with the ACOG 3.5x, is you're able to mount an RMR on top of it. However, this is not recommended. This is what it looks like on the weapon. This is what it looks like when you're aiming with it. The RMR has a really nice dot, but the problem with the RMR is it's very floaty. And then this is how it obstructs your vision on the top when you are using the 3.5x. The ACOG 4x. Somehow, amazingly, I dislike this scope more than the 3.5x, so this scope for me goes straight into F tier, which is kind of a disappointment. It's kind of a bummer, because these scopes are supposed to be really good, but in-game, I just really don't like them. So, to start my list of complaints, I don't like how thick this housing is. And I don't like these parts that extend beyond the housing because it makes me feel like the housing is like even bigger than how it actually is. When I'm using this scope, I almost get a sense of feeling like claustrophobic while I'm aiming with it. And while the 3.5 was effective in removing a lot of the gradient from the part where you see, the 4x is not as effective and the gradient does remain. That being said, the reticle here in the middle for the 4x is far superior to the reticle on the 3.5x. So I've tried to make myself like this scope, and the more I use it, the more I actually dislike it. Whereas with the 3.5x, the more I've used it, the more I feel like I'm getting a hang of it, and the more I like it. With the 4x ACOG, you can mount an iron sight and an RMR to it. So this is what your iron sight would look like. This is what aiming with it would look like. And this is how it looks on the top of the 4x. And you can mount an RMR to it. Again, I don't recommend this because it's very floaty. And when you're aiming with it, there's actually something I really don't like. If you see this little metal piece here that sticks up, I really don't like this. This really upsets me. And here's how it looks on top of the 4x. The ACOG 4x tan goes right next to the other ACOG. They are identical except for the external finish of the scope. So this kind of matches your RSAS grip a little bit better. It's kind of cool if you want to go for a tan build, but the same problems remain, if not are even made worse. So the fact that this is a lighter color for me, it makes this housing and the external and the parts extending from it, it makes this situation even worse for me. Like this is even harder for me to ignore because of the lighter color of the housing. And as with the other ACOG 4X, you can mount an iron sight and you can mount an RMR. This is what the iron sight looks like on the tan 4X ACOG. It's basically the same as the 4X ACOG. It's just the tan one looks tan. Well, the tan one has the external finish. You can also mount an RMR to it, however, I do not recommend this. This is what it looks like on the scope. This is what aiming with the RMR looks like. Again, you have this metal piece here that I am really not a fan of. The RMR looks great though, however, it being floaty is a real problem. And this is how the RMR affects the 4X zoom. The Valde. This is a 1x and 6x scope that used to be very good. Previously, in other wipes, this was probably an A tier scope. However, when this scope was very good, I didn't like it. So now that the scope is not very good anymore, I really don't like it. So this is probably the most controversial pick in the tier list. For me, the Valde goes into Delta tier. And mainly the reason why is because when I imagine the Valde on my weapon, I get the same kind of negative feeling like if I had an Elcan on my weapon. So yes, the 6X is a little bit more useful, but I still have that same feeling of like, I don't really want this on my weapon. That being said, that's kind of a disappointment because this thing used to be pretty good and it looks pretty nice and compact. This is the 1X. As you can see, the housing is pretty nice, but the gradient upon the edges is quite a problem. And this is actually a really big problem while you're shooting, because this like dark part, if you imagine me like grabbing it and pulling it down, when you're shooting with this thing, the dark part can extend even to this far down. So this thing is basically very ineffective for full auto or even for rapid fire semi-automatic shots, which to me gives it its very poor rating. If it's not even good for semi-auto shots, it's definitely not going to be working for full auto. And this is the 6X. So the housing on the Valde looks pretty nice, but it's a very ineffective scope for even semi-auto fire. For a bolt action, this would actually probably be really good, but it's kind of a steep price for a bolt action scope. And also the Burris TAC 30 is simply better and cheaper, but we will cover that in the optics section of the tier list. So that is my tier list for the assault scopes. Prepare to get flashbanged. Here is some information about them. As you can see, it's the name of the scope, the price converted to rubles, the trader who sells it, the level you need to be with the trader to get it, and the tier rank. So as you can see, for example, like with the hammer requires the delta point. Well, it doesn't require it, but the whole purpose of the hammer is to then have the delta point, and also with the Bravo to have the Burris fast fire on it. Oh, I've been saying that wrong this whole time. So you can see that you might think, okay, the Valde is the most expensive at 54,000. However, you can see that the hammer is more expensive at 73,000, and the Burris fast fire at 73,000. I thought this might be fun to show. These are the scopes organized by their tier rank, and these are the scopes organized by their price. Kind of an interesting idea to see, hey, do you get what you pay for? Although this doesn't factor in the additional scope, like for example, the additional costs per scope. So for example, with the hammer wanting to put the delta point on the top of it. So this is just kind of fun. Anyways, that concludes my list for the assault scopes. Collimators, is that a real word? Culminate. Basically, these are your reflex sights and your red dots and stuff like that. The EOTech is by far the best in this category, capable of doing pretty much everything, except it's not very good at being used with night vision. So the MRS is my recommended night vision sight, and the EKP and EKP Dove are a really good early wipe or budget option. Looking at the Comp M4, this guy goes to Echo tier, and the main reasons are because the housing is too big, especially this giant cog here. The dot is nice, but your field of view is very small and the housing is very large, so that's what gives it its very low ranking. Next, we're going to be looking at the Pro. This will go into F tier because I believe it is worse than the Comp M4. You have these lens caps on the top and this cog on the side. So the cog on the side and the lenses on the top and the housing, it blocks a lot of your view, and what you can actually see through the scope is really not that impressive. Next up, the EKP Dove. This is a really, really good one. We're putting it in Bravo. These can come with a sunshade on them. I do recommend the sunshade. So this is the Dove variant. The thing that I like about this is a very clean, nice scope. This is a very clean and very nice sight to use. That being said, one thing about it, as you'll notice over here in the corner, when you're aiming it at certain surfaces or certain lighting, it can make everything in the circle have a red tone to it. It's like everything turns a little bit red. It's not really a big deal, but something to mention. And there are 4 different settings: a dot with an arrow, and a sort of crosshair. My favorite is this one. This is the one I definitely recommend. This is the difference of having the sunshade versus not having the sunshade. So you can see in terms of how it affects your visibility, it is very minor. And the ergo benefit, I think, is worth it for the removal of a little bit of visibility. That being said, if you value this visibility, This is how it looks without the sunshade. The EKP, this is the same as the Dove, so it is going also into Bravo. It's a very nice one, fits on Picatinny rails. Again, it has the same issue where under certain lighting or when you're aiming at some stuff, it can turn the background of it red. It, again, has 4 different sights, or it has 4 different options for how you want to have the dot displayed. And it also has a sunshade. PKAA. This thing is pretty terrible. It is going into F rank immediately. It is massive, and that is a complaint I hear quite frequently. The housing is very large in relation to what you can actually see. So a lot of these, I place them so low because the housing is way larger than what you see, and that's quite a problem. This is not one that I would ever really go out to use. I would probably use iron sights over this. The 553. This is great. This goes into A rank. This is very good. So this EOTech has a purpose because it is mounted slightly higher. So if you have the M4 post here in the front, this will actually look over the M4 post. So this does have a purpose for being in the game. It is pretty nice, and it goes up to A rank. The EOTech Tan, also A rank. This is how it looks. It matches your RSAS grip a little bit nicer if you want to go for a tan build. One of the things about this I actually don't like is this little curve here. However, the sight is still very effective and very nice. This is also one of those sights that's mounted a little bit higher. So if there was the M4 post, it would be about here. So you could see above the M4 post with this sight. The HHS. This goes into the question mark category because I would really like this scope. This could be my favorite scope in the whole entire game. But it has multiple dots, and it messes with your mouse's sensitivity when you're in the 1x and when you're in the 3x. So I'm fine with it messing up with your sensitivity in the 3x, but the way it messes up with your sensitivity in 1x is really, really bad. But as a little bit of a thought experiment, this is not in the game, but I have always wondered how this scope would look with a single dot. So in MS Paint, I removed some of the dots and tried to make it look more clean. And this is what it would look like with the 3x. Again, this is not in the game. I think this would be my primary sight of choice, like 100% of the time, if it was 1 dot, and if the sensitivity of the 1x, if it made more sense, or if it was identical to the sensitivity of the normal EOTech with 1 dot. Because 3x to me, I think, is the best magnification in this game for most maps. The fact that this is a 3x could be very, very valuable if it was usable at all. The HHS Tan, identical to the other HHS, so it'll also go in the question mark category. Pretty reasonable for a tan build. However, this one has the many, many dots, and it has the sensitivity issue, which messes with your mouse on 1x, so that's not very good. The EOTech 1 dot, straight into S rank. This thing is the best. This is what I use like all of the time. This is the cleanest sight. This is the most beautiful sight. This is the best sight. If you're playing this game, you're probably using this sight, and for good reason. It's very, very nice, very clean. It's just great. It's a wonderful sight, straight into S rank. The EOTech with 2 dots. This goes into question mark for me, because... Okay, first of all, let me show you how it looks on the gun, okay? Now, the problem with this is it has 2 dots. This causes me a great deal of confusion when I look at it. I don't like this at all. This is really upsetting to me. So to me, this goes into the question mark category. So yeah, that goes down here into question mark, because it's like, why make an EOTech with 2 dots? I don't really get it. The Hollow Sun. This is going into E tier. These lens caps do exist, however, they're pretty flat. So this is actually more reasonable than the other ones, in my opinion. And the thing that's really cool about the Hollow Sun is it comes with a laser. So when you hit the change optic, it shoots out a nice little green laser. So that's kind of neat. The UTG, I actually like this one. So this is going into Delta tier. The UTG is it's a pretty standard. I feel like this housing is thin enough in relation to what you see that it warrants the higher tier. And the cool thing about this is you can change the color of the color of the red dot from being red into being green. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. The Obzor, that goes straight into E tier. This thing is also large on your weapon. However, when you're actually aiming with it, it looks pretty reasonable. The housing is not too ridiculous in relation to what you see, and this reticle is very interesting. I like the fact that it's green. I like the design of it. I think it's actually pretty good. I think it is pretty interesting, and it doesn't deserve an F tier rank. It's, what did I say? E tier? Yeah, E tier. Okay, so that's fine. OPK7. This is the unaffectionately known as the nipple sight, which is kind of gross. Thanks, guys, for that. This is going into F tier for me. So this is what it looks like. And just like that, demonetized yet again. So as you can see, it's not like the Monstrum where it makes sense. It's kind of just ugly and weird. So this goes to F tier for me. I really don't like this one. I don't want to use it. Now the OPK7 Dove, this is actually, on the flip side, quite good. This goes up to Bravo tier. This is what it looks like. It is a Dove mount, and it is a nice and clean blue reticle. This looks pretty good. I'm okay with this. This is something that I would actually use, but it's not something that I'm overly fond of. So I think it fits perfectly fine in the Bravo tier. The Roombot, or Romeo T. The Roombot. It's called the Roombot. I'm calling it that from now on. This is the Roomba. It's pretty big on your weapon, kind of an eyesore. And here's where the problems show up. I do not like the fact that there's multiple dots, and I do not like this outer circle. Also, this housing is a lot larger than the EOTech's housing. So for me, I don't understand why you would use this over an EOTech, because the EOTech has a lot thinner housing. This is a lot thicker. I do not like this at all. And I feel like where you can actually see is a lot smaller. So this is not a very good one for me. Where did I put this guy again? Charlie tier? Okay, Charlie makes sense. The SRS, this goes to Charlie as well. This is a good nighttime scope. It has a very, very clean dot, and the housing is... Well, I think the housing on this guy is a little bit too much. I don't really like how massive the housing is, so that's why it goes into Charlie tier, but the dot is pretty nice, so that's okay. Good for nighttime, but other than that, eh. The Pallade, I think this is called the P1, goes into Charlie tier as well. I actually am quite fond of this guy. I think it's pretty nice. Look at that. Look at how wide, how big this is. This is great. You have all this vision here, all this view. The only problem with this dot is it is a little bit floaty, kind of like the RMR, but it is not as floaty as the RMR, so I would say this is still in the realm of usability. There are 3 different settings you can have for the red dot. I think the actual red dot is literally the best out of the 3. Targeting ring. This is not going to be seriously ranked because this is for shotguns only, so it goes into the question mark tier. It's actually pretty reasonable. This is kind of like what it looks like. I wish this was like a little bit higher. Overall, for a shotgun only scope, it's not bad. The Crochet. This is a pretty ugly one. It's kind of similar reticle to the Monstrum. So this is going into Delta tier. So it's pretty big on your weapon, and like I said, it's pretty similar to the Monstrum in terms of the reticle. However, the Monstrum is a 2x, this is only a 1x. However, the height over bore on this guy is pretty bad, and this is not one of my preferred scopes. This is not one of my preferred sights at all. The PK-120, this goes into Charlie tier. I think this is actually better than the previous one. The reticle, I think, is more useful. I think the housing is a little bit nicer, and it is a little bit closer. It's a little bit lower mounted. So it's actually not the worst thing ever. This reticle also is pretty reasonable at nighttime raids. So this actually goes pretty well with night vision. So into Charlie tier it goes. The UH-1, I like this. This goes into Alpha tier. The UH-1 looks pretty big on your gun, but that's okay. Look at how nice this is. This is like beautiful housing, very, very thin, beautiful housing. This reticle is interesting. It's something slightly different than the EOTech, but similar enough that you still have that like, I like this kind of feeling going on. The UH-1, pretty good. The Walther MRS, this goes into Alpha tier. And in my opinion, this is the best nighttime sight in the game. It looks very beautifully clean on the weapon. And this is fantastic with night vision. This is really, really good. It's the super clean housing, super clean, very nice look. It has 4 different settings for the red dot. I think this is the best one. I definitely recommend. And yeah, it's an excellent sight. So this is the complete list of the Collimators. Prepare to get flashbanged. Here is some information about them, mainly being the name of them, the price converted to rubles, trader level, and the tier rank, as well as additional costs. And for fun, here they are organized by tier rank. And also for fun, here they are organized by price. So that concludes my Collimator tier list. Compact Collimators. The Burris Fast Fire and the Delta Point are the best in this category, but the Burris is blurry and the Delta Point's a triangle. And the PK-06, it used to be the best in the whole game. It's fallen off, but it's still pretty good. It's a great budget or early wipe option in Charlie tier. Alright, starting with the Acro P1. This is not very good, so it'll go into F tier. It is very bulky on your weapon, and the housing is pretty big in comparison to what you can see. However, this sight does have a legitimate purpose in the game. There are some scopes where the scope is too big for a low-profile sight, so this is one of those sights that's, since it's raised higher, it can actually look over the scope. That being said, I still believe it goes into F rank because I would never use it normally. The H2. This goes into E rank for being slightly more usable. It looks a little bit better, however these lens covers are quite gigantic and this dot is a little bit too big for my preference. Housing is okay. T1, this goes right next to the H2 in E tier. This is what it looks like. It has this big dial on the side. The dot is more appropriate. The housing is still quite a bit big for my taste. The PK-06. This used to be the best in the game. I am putting it in Charlie tier because it is still pretty good. A lot of people hate on this sight from the sake of nostalgia. It was the best. It's not the best anymore, but it's still pretty good. Look at this thing. Very clean housing, very nice dot, and you can change the dot part of it into 3 different options. I think the actual dot is the best of the 3. The Burris Fast Fire. This is my personal favorite in the category. I am putting it into Alpha tier. It is very small and compact. It is excellent as a backup sight. It is so clean and nice to look at. The only problem is the dot. The dot is a bit blurry, and that can be a deal breaker for a lot of people. So here are 3 examples on 3 different surfaces, one white, blue, red. You can see on the white there is a high level of blur. It should look something more like this. On the blue, it's a lot smaller of a blur, but it still should have no blur at all. And on the red, it's like a medium blur, but it should be looking more like this. So on the top is what it actually looks like in game. On the bottom is what I think it should look like by my understanding of what it is. If it looked like this, I think it would be easily S rank, but at the moment in game, it looks like this. So it is what it is. The P90 ring. This goes very easily into F tier. This is terrible. You would never use it. It looks great on the weapon, but any attempt at using this is really terrible. You would never use this. The only time you would use this is if you got this weapon and you had to eliminate a scav or something on your way to the extract. But otherwise, once you get to your stash, you will change this and you will sell this and you'll never use this. This is not very good at all. The housing is giant. What you can actually see is very small, and the reticle is giant too. So it's really difficult to see. The reticle's huge, the housing is huge, it's just not good. It's just simply not good. This is not something you will ever want to use, and it only fits on the P90, and 99% sure most people will hop in their stash and just rip this thing off and sell it. The Delta Point. This is going directly to A rank. This is a fantastic sight. However, it is a triangle. The mount does raise it higher than the Burris, so that is an advantage in certain setups. The Delta Point looks really great. This housing feels nice and strong. The dot in the middle, however, is a triangle, which for some people is a problem. For some people it's not a problem. For me personally, it is not a problem, but it is something to mention and consider. That being said, unlike the ACOG 3.5x, this is a triangle that's more friendly and more easy to use. Mainly because this is a 1x, you don't have to worry too much about, do I aim at the tip of the triangle or do I aim at the center of the triangle? Because it's a 1x, you can always use the center of the triangle to aim, and it is really not a problem. If you essentially think of this as a red dot, it will serve you the same as the triangle function. You don't need to worry about aiming at the tip of the triangle or the middle of the triangle. Just put the triangle on the target and you'll be fine. The fact that it's 1x means you don't have to worry too much about this. The Romeo 4. I do not like this, but I will admit it is better than the H2 and T1, so it goes into Delta tier. This is the Romeo. It has much better housing, and the dot is acceptable. You could actually use this. You could actually use this. I just don't prefer to. This is not one that I typically use, but this is usable. The RMR, this is the opposite. This is unusable. This goes into F tier. This is terrible. The RMR is not very good. So it looks great on your weapon. It looks extremely great when you're using it. I even like this housing, even though the top kind of mirrors the bottom, but the dot is beautiful. This is a very beautiful dot. The RMR very much excels at that. But this optic is unusable because it's way too floaty. It floats so much. It's really hard to tell what you're actually aiming at because of how floaty it is. And that is the completed Compact Collimators tier list. Prepare to get flashbanged. Here's some information about them. The price converted to rubles, the trader who sells them, the trader level they unlock, and my tier list ranking. Here they are organized by tier rank and organized by price, just for fun. And yeah, that completes my Compact Collimators tier list. Optics. These are the bread and butter of the game. Chances are you probably have one of these on your weapon right now, and there's someone in a bush using one of these to look at you right now. You guys already know, the TAC 30, the Voodoo, and the Razor Gen 2, these are S rank, best in the game, extremely good. The PSO1 and her sister scopes are a really great early wipe or budget option. Alright, let's get into it. The PSO1 and her sister scopes, these are all pretty much the same, so we're going to do them one by one. The PSO1 goes into Bravo tier. It is really nice. Here's what it looks like. This is the 4X, and you can make it red. It also comes with a sunshade or a cover. I definitely don't recommend this because when you're when you're using it, it blocks all of your views. So like this is what it looks like, and really, really not so good. The PSO 1M2, very, very similar to the other one. As you might notice, the other one has more of a dark gray finish. This is more of a light gray finish, but they're pretty much identical. This is the 4X, and then you can also make it red. And you can also put a sunshade on this, but again, not recommended. The PSO 1M2-1, this one is the same outside finish, like the light gray. However, the reticle is different. You'll notice here that the V is larger on this one, and that is what makes this one my favorite out of the three. And you can also make it red to see it better. I like to keep it on red pretty much all the time. You can also put a sunshade on this thing, but it is not recommended. All right, the TAC 30. This is probably my favorite. I think it's straight into S rank. The thing that's great about the TAC 30 is you have excellent field of view here. And also, because the TAC 30 is a 1X and 4X, you don't get too much like over zoom. You don't get that like 6X zoom that you do with the Voodoo and the Razor. 4X is less zoomed in, so for a lot of situations it's actually more pleasant to use. However, on certain maps you will want the 6X, but the 4X on majority of maps is actually really excellent. The Voodoo. This was a favorite of many people. I've always kind of had reservations about the Voodoo, but I've grown to like it a lot. So this is the Voodoo. It's really good, straight into S rank. It has a 1X, and you'll notice here on the Voodoo compared to the TAC 30, there's less of a field of view. The Voodoo has, however, a 6X zoom. So for very precise tapping, the 6X is a lot more valuable on some maps, for example, like Lighthouse or Shoreline. Yeah, Voodoo, excellent, straight into S rank. The FF. This is actually kind of usable, so it goes into Delta tier. This is one of those strange ones that like you probably are never going to use it, but I found it's okay on Lighthouse for fighting rogues. It's a pretty this reticle is not my favorite. I don't like it. I think all these little like circles are a little bit too overwhelming when you look at it. However, this is a reasonable scope for Lighthouse for sniping the rogues. This is a 4X and a 16X. So the 4X is still usable in terms of like when you're trying to fight other players, and the 16X is just mainly for long distance shots. This guy is usable, however, not the greatest, and the reticle is a little bit difficult to look at. However, if you look at the top here of this van, all these little like loops, they show you the little dot of like what you're looking at. So when you're trying to line up a target with these, you can actually see the target through the dot. So that's kind of cool, but it's not the greatest thing to look at. The 1P59 and also the 1P69, these are basically the same, so they're going into the same place, going into Echo tier. It is quite a giant thing on your weapon. Also, to quickly talk about these mounts, you can either mount it as a Dove or as a Picatinny mount. The mount works for both scopes. You can have it mounted either way. I actually really like this scope, but at the same time, never use it because this scope is a 3X, but the problem is the scope has 4 functions. So it doesn't switch from 3X to 10X. It switches from 3X to red 3X to 10X to red 10X. And this is extremely detrimental. This is very, very bad when you're actually trying to play in any kind of like PvP situation, because you'll be like, okay, I want the extra zoom of the 10X, but the problem is to get there, you have to go through 3X, 3X again, 10X, and then you're like, okay, I have my 10X. Now I need to switch back to 3. So then you have to go red 10X, and then you can go to the 3X again. This is very, very annoying. If you plan to have this in 3X and just keep it in 3X like the whole time and never switch from 3X, this is actually pretty good. It also comes with one of these sunshades. It is large. When it's on your weapon, it's large. Look at how much real estate this takes, but it's it takes up so much of your screen when you're zoomed. It's ridiculous. Like, I know the ergo of this scope is terrible, but this is not good. This is not a good, like, I don't recommend this. You can still do it. I don't recommend it. The P169 also straight into Echo tier. It's essentially the same as the other one. If you look here in the picture, you see my happy little mouse cursor. If you look here in the picture, this middle dude, let me just zoom in for you guys. If you look here, you'll see this dude is smaller. This dude is larger. What's the joke? Oh, I know the joke. This is you. This is the guy she told you not to worry about, right? That's the joke. So that's the only real difference. So for sake of variation, this is now the Picatinny mount. Again, both of these scopes work with both mounts. You can have them on a dove. You can have them on the rail. This is the Picatinny rail mount variant. And as you can see, here's the thing. It's pretty big. So this optic suffers from the same thing as the other one, where you have your 3x, which looks great. Then you have your red 3x, and you're like, okay. And then you have your 10x, and then your red 10x. So again, the problem is when you're switching from 3x to 10x, this is extremely frustrating to try and go through 4 different modes that the optic can be in. If this optic was only like, okay, here's my proposed idea, right? Here's my proposed idea. Make the P159 the normal 3x and the normal 10x. Make the P169 the red 3x and the red 10x. That way there's only 2 modes that you need to switch back and forth from. I think that would improve these optics dramatically, and people might actually use them, because the 3x is really nice and the 10x is like, okay, great, we have some more zoom, this is excellent, but they're just too frustrating to use. They're too frustrating to use, and they're just inefficient in any kind of PvP situation. The Mark IV, this is going into the question mark category because it's actually pretty nice, but it's completely unusable. It's actually pretty nice, but it's completely unusable. Look at this reticle. This is a nice reticle. This is good. Housing is clean, but it's a 20x, and it's only a 20x. So even on maps like Lighthouse, Shoreline, Woods, you're gonna, like, when you see a target, you'll be like, awesome, I have the optic for this situation. I can zoom in on the target. As soon as you start aiming, you'll be like, where did the guy go? Like, it's so hard to scan and actually find what you're looking for with this thing. It's just completely unusable. And it's a 20x, so that's big zoom. So that goes into the question marks category, and the March Tactical also goes into the question marks category. You've probably used this in the Gone Hunting or Gone Camping quest, the one where you have to kill Sturman with this. And that quest used to be pretty nice. You could just roll up on Sniper Rock and just go ahead and get him with your 14x. However, now that Sturman is in different locations and stuff, this quest is a massive pain. And if you've ever tried to do that quest with this optic, you know that 14x is quite difficult to use. But it looks pretty clean. It looks pretty nice, and the housing is nice. So kind of a shame. It goes into the question mark category. It could actually be good, but the fact that it's only a 14x zoom makes it kind of difficult to use. The 1P78. I've actually used this in several online and offline raids because I wanted to like it, because it looks so terrible. I'm like, it's the underdog, right? We have to like it, but I don't like it. It goes straight into F tier. This is what it looks like. The problem is, like, it's a 3x zoom, and I wanted to like it because I think 3x is like the best magnification for a lot of maps in this game, but it's just not nice to use. And the fact that the reticle is only in black and there's no red variant, When you're in a location like the reserve bunker, for example, this is extremely difficult to use because it's very dark in the reserve bunker. So when you're looking at your reticle, it's easy for it to get lost with the fact that it's so dark in the bunker. So this has a shade on it to improve the ergo. However, it's again not recommended. In this part where it's on your weapon, it actually looks reasonable, like it's not too bad. But as soon as you zoom in with it, you're like, yeah, okay, this is not going to work. This is not happening. The USP-1. I actually kind of like this thing, but I acknowledge it probably should be an F tier. So this is what it looks like on your weapon. It's quite massive. And this is what it looks like when you're aiming with it. It is a 4X. This is gigantic. This takes up so much real estate of your screen. It's actually crazy. I do think it's pretty interesting and unique that the reticle hangs from above and goes down. And when you're shooting this, you aim right here at this tip. You aim at the tip of the triangle right here. It does come with a sunshade to increase ergo, but again, it takes up like your whole entire screen, which actually like this whole side of your screen is taken up anyway. So you're just now covering up this side also. So I don't know. As you can see, this is probably not good. You probably don't want this, but I don't know. Maybe you do. Maybe you do. The NC Star. This is one of those weird hybrid optics with a reflex on the top. It is not very good. I am putting it in F tier. The main problem with this thing is when you're using the actual scope part of the scope. Like, it looks great. You could make it work for a tan build. The reflex on top. This guy looks pretty good. Pretty nice. I think this used to mess with your sensitivity. I think they improved it, but it still feels a little bit strange. But this is the problem for me. This is where this scope or optic just falls apart. This is a 3X, which, okay, not bad. But your field of view is tiny. The housing feels massive in comparison to what you can see. And the housing feels even larger because of the gradient of the scope. Like, this gradient going around, it makes the scope feel a lot bigger and your field of view a lot smaller. This reticle, however, again, it's kind of weird. I don't really like it. And I think this is a 9x zoom. And you can see you have a very small field of view. You're not really sure what you're looking at. If you can spot something with the 3x and then zoom in on it with the 9x, that's probably the best way to do it. But again, this is not my favorite scope. This is not my favorite optic. I would rather not have this on my weapon. The Night Force. This is going also into question mark category because there's a lot of things about this that's actually really nice. Like, it looks great on your weapon. It looks like this reticle to me looks really nice. I like this reticle. I like the housing. It's very clean. The problem is the zooms on it. It starts with a 7x, which is usable at range, but then it also has a 16x. So, like, the thing that kills this for me is the 7x. If there was a zoom that was like 3 or 4x with this thing, I would consider it usable. However, 7x in most situations is too much zoom for any kind of PvP engagement. That being said, maybe this shouldn't go in question mark tier. Maybe this should go in delta tier, because you could use this for sniping rogues in Lighthouse. So that's one reasonable use of it. And it's pretty clean and looks nice, so maybe it should go right here in delta tier, because it is usable against rogues on Lighthouse, but you're not going to be using it for PvP, probably. The PU 3.5, I am not a fan of this thing at all. You can only mount it to a Mosin, I'm pretty sure, and it goes into F tier for me. So here's what it looks like. Pretty compact, pretty cool. But this is where it falls apart for me. Like, the housing is great, but the reticle for me is a problem. I don't like these like bars. This little pointy dude is fine. I'm okay with the pointy dude. And by the way, you aim here at the tip of the triangle. But yeah, not much in terms of a field of view. It's great on a Mosin if you plan to use a Mosin, but other than that, in general, not really good. The SNB 1 to 8. I actually think this scope is pretty okay. It currently messes with your sensitivity, so that is quite a problem, but I am putting it in Charlie tier because I think it is usable and it looks pretty good. It can fit a tan build. This is what the 1X looks like. And this is the 8X. It looks very clean, it looks very nice, the housing is great. The only thing that's a really serious negative about this is it messes with your mouse's sensitivity when you're aiming. And for a lot of people, that is an absolute deal breaker, and it's an understandable deal breaker because you don't want your sensitivity to be changing so dramatically even when you're in like a 1X setting. In an 8X setting, it's completely understandable. However, in a 1X setting, it can lead to a lot of frustration and potentially deaths in a PvP situation because of the difference in sensitivity. The SNB 3.12. This I am actually pretty okay with. I am putting it in Charlie tier as well. Looks pretty good on your weapon. This is the 3X, and this is the 12X. I'm pretty sure this guy also changes your sensitivity in an awkward way. However, I do like to use this scope for sniping the rogues on Lighthouse. I find the 3X to be very effective at locating the rogues, and the 12X making it easier to line up my tapping shots so that you can defeat the rogues with minimal problems. The Voms Palad 4X. You will likely find this on VPOs from the scavs. It has these lens caps, which are kind of an eyesore, however, not really that bad. They do take up some real estate on your screen, but they're not like the end of the world bad. However, the scope itself is not very good. The housing feels large in comparison to what you can see, and it's a 4X, and the 4X just simply isn't that great. So that goes straight into F tier as well. Pretty good early wipe, but other than that, not really that great. It is a 4X early wipe for a rail, so maybe you would consider using it for that. The Razer HD Gen 2. This thing is fantastic. This goes straight into S rank. I thought this would become my favorite optic in the game very quickly. Because it is a beautifully clean optic with a nice plus sign and a red dot in the middle, so in low light situations you always know where you're aiming. It is a 1X and a 6X. I thought this would become my favorite optic in the game. I still like the TAC 30 quite a bit. I still like the Voodoo quite a bit. This, like, it depends what day it is. This is my favorite optic some days. It's not my favorite optic other days, but it's definitely S rank. It's super good, and it's one of the best in the game. It's a great addition as well. It's also a great addition to the game because for a long time with the TAC 30 and the Voodoo, I wanted something with this like plus sign crosshair style, and this is probably the best that they could have added. The fact that it has the little red dot in the middle for low light situations, fantastic. Really, really good. S rank absolutely deserves it. So now we're going to do a little comparison of the S rank scopes. Here is the TAC 30 in comparison to the Voodoo. So you can see what I was talking about, that the field of view is a little bit larger on the TAC 30. However, the TAC 30 is a 4X and the Voodoo is a 6X, so you can see the dramatic difference in terms of the van which we're aiming at. However, like I said, the TAC 30 is really great on maps like Customs, whereas the Voodoo shines more in maps like, I suppose, Reserve, Woods, Shoreline. It can be used on Lighthouse. You can get rogues with it. It's very good. But yeah, so this is a comparison of the TAC 30 to the Voodoo. Now we're going to look at a comparison of the TAC 30 versus the Razer. Again, the TAC 30 has more field of view, and the TAC 30 is a 4X versus the Razer being a 6X. In some PvP engagements, the 4X is a massive benefit, and in some engagements, you really wish you had the extra zoom of the 6X. So it really depends what situation you're in. The TAC 30 could be better, the Voodoo and Razer could be better. It just depends what kind of a situation you're in. in general, the TAC 30 is better for closer engagements. The Voodoo and Razor are better for longer distance engagements. And here is a comparison of the Voodoo and the Razor. As you can see, the housing matches up pretty much exactly the same, so your field of view is the same. Both of them are 6x, so you can see the van looks reasonably the same both on the left and the right. These are the optics that do the most work. They're great in various situations. They're just fantastic. So that is the completed optics list. The versatility of the TAC 30, Voodoo, and Razor Gen 2 make them the best in the game. The 1x, the zoom with the 4x on the TAC 30, and the 6x with the Voodoo and Gen 2, they're extremely good. Prepare to get flashbanged. So this is a little bit just for fun. This is some information about the scopes. The price converted to rubles, what trader sells it, at what trader level it unlocks, and a little bit of the additional cost. So a lot of these scopes, they really do require mounts. So for the sake of consistency, I tried to use the same mount for all the scopes where it was accessible. So for example, for all of the scopes that require a 30mm mount, I used the same 30mm mount for all of them. The scopes that require a 34mm mount, I used the same 34mm mount for all of them. So you can just take a quick look at that. For fun, here's the optics organized by their tier rank. And here are the optics organized by price. And that concludes my optics tier list and the whole entire sights tier list. I think the best sight in the game is the rear iron sights on the Mosin, because one time I loaded in on my character and I had a Mosin with a rear sight on it, and I killed a juiced PMC. He was extremely geared, so I took his MP5 with his high capacity 20-round magazines, and I also took his level 10 trooper armor, and I extracted, and that's why the rear iron sights on the Mosin are the best optic in the game, and that's why the streamer is wrong. 7.